If you're wondering what to expect from our next speaker, you should know that this is the fourth time he has come to this conference. And we are so grateful that Bilahari Kausikan is back with us again. Fewer public officials, current or former, are as shrewd observers of foreign affairs than Secretary Kausikan. The former permanent secretary for Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in nearly 4 decades at the ministry. He served both here and abroad, including as ambassador to the Russian Federation and permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. His informed and no-holds-barred commentary is instructive and refreshing. And it's also why we like to reserve the last word for him. So please welcome Secretary Kausikan. All yours.
Anyway, I thought I'd do something a little different this time. Instead of talking about particular issues, and I'll talk a bit about Iran and I'll talk a bit about US-China relations, 2 subjects you can hardly avoid these days. But I thought I'll put them in a broader frame because since I last came here, I have been getting more and more concerned about how news is presented, or how people, whether you are in the public sector or in the private sector, whether you are a government official or work in a corporate, or you are a journalist or an academic, I see certain confusions in the analysis of geopolitics, which I think is beginning to concern me. So let me try to frame what I have to say on particular issues in this broader frame about how to look at geopolitics in general. Right? As usual, I'm not going to talk too long. I hope this will be a dialogue rather than a monologue. But I need to say a few things in the beginning. Our means Singapore. Singapore's first, and in my opinion at least, the greatest foreign minister, Mr. S. Rajaratnam, often made a distinction between the foreign policy of words and the foreign policy of deeds. He said every country needs 2 foreign policies. Every country has 2 foreign policies and needs 2 foreign policies. A foreign policy of words, or what he sometimes called a foreign policy of theology, in which we all stand for high ideals, and a foreign policy of practical diplomacy, which is what we need to do to survive in a jungle world. And this is still very largely a jungle world. He said we need both, but to confuse them is suicidal. I'll give you an example in a while about the confusion, right? But one of the very important mistakes people make in looking at geopolitics, particularly in times of volatility, is to pay attention to events, particular events, things happen. And of course you must, it's not that you can ignore them, but you pay too much attention to events and not enough attention to the processes out of which all events arise. Very seldom things come out of nothing. And that leads to a loss of perspective. And that loss of perspective actually adds to the volatility we are all experiencing. Because if you have no perspective, the odds are you're either going to overreact or underreact to events. And then you will have to correct your overreactions or your underreaction, and then correct your corrections. And that cycle of responses adds to the volatility. Now, perspective cannot erase volatility, but it could possibly limit the range of oscillations and therefore the volatility. And that's why it's important. Loss of perspective can be one of the more common loss of perspective is to look at things in a binary way, right? particularly when you are dealing with wars or dealing with great power competitions. The temptation is always to ask who won or who lost at any particular point of time. And that's not an invalid way of looking at things, but it's a rather simplistic way of looking at things. Because most things, as I said, are processes. And to my mind, it is very seldom it makes much sense to ask at any point of a process who won or who lost, because the next point, your conclusion may be reversed. In any case, the choices for countries are very seldom only binary. Sometimes they are, but very seldom. And I'll come back to that, right? But I promise to give you an example of a confusion of theology and practical diplomacy. Earlier this year, on the 20th of January, to be precise, Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, speaking at Davos, made a speech that was highly acclaimed. His point was that the international order had ruptured. That's his word. Sounds like they got a hernia. But it had ruptured, and therefore middle powers who shared similar values should get together to uphold international order. That's the gist of his argument. And it was, I happened to be in Zurich. I didn't go to Davos. So I happened to be in Zurich, and I was listening to you on live feed. And it was certainly an extremely well-delivered speech. You know, he spoke very passionately, as if he was an Old Testament prophet, revealing, conveying some revelation vouchsafed to him by God. But I thought the content was rather banal. In any case, his argument had a very fundamental internal contradiction. It was banal because, although he did not seem to have noticed, many countries, particularly in Asia, had been doing exactly what he advocated for many years without the melodrama of evoking a world crumbling around his ears. Right? And there was a fundamental internal contradiction because it was patently obvious to everybody, I think, except maybe to him, that middle powers in any combination could not either deter Russia or balance China without at least the US minimally at its back. It's just not possible for them to do that. And so the internal contradiction was this. If they can't do this, then whatever they could do may be useful, but it could not replace the international order he was lamenting had ruptured. Right? If it was true that the US was no longer willing to uphold it. But I think the fundamental mistake he made was to confuse theology with practical diplomacy. This very idea of international order is frankly borders on theological, in my mind. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it is an extremely subjective thing. His mistake was to assume that his idea of international order would necessarily be shared by everybody, as if it was like the law of gravity. You know, you don't have a choice about whether you want to believe in the law of gravity or not. But you do have a choice about whether you want to believe in international order, and if so, what kind of international order you choose to believe in. And the kind of American-led liberal international order whose passing he was lamenting was never accepted, even at its height, by every country in the world. In fact, I would say a rough estimate, half of the world did not accept it or accepted it only in part. And in fact, even those who accepted it often had different interpretations of what it meant. Right? When we talk about rules-based order, it's not that we are talking about something that doesn't exist, but we are talking about something that is primarily theological. And theology is always subject to many interpretations. When we may use the same word, rules-based order, but which selection of rules do we choose to emphasize? What interpretation of those rules? This is never uniform. Right? My point is that this is one example of loss of perspective. I can give you some more if you want, but I don't want to take up too much time. So with this broad framework, that you need to see things as part of processes, if you are not going to overreact or underreact, you need to see things, particularly in a historical perspective, right? And you need to understand why countries do things. Countries do things for a variety of reasons, and their reasons are not necessarily your reasons, even though you may think they are aligned, right? Okay, with that broad, and one last point, I think, the kind of instability you are experiencing now is not new in the US, right? It's not new in it's not new in the world, right? In fact, competition and therefore conflict, or at least the risk of conflict, these are inherent characteristics of international relations, and they are never absent, right? In some degree, this kind of harsh truth was masked for a very short period, short and exceptional period of world history, maybe about 20 years or so at the end of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall came down, and maximum 20 years, because it was a rather exceptional period, because Russia, post-Soviet Russia, had not yet regained internal coherence, and China was still hiding its light and biding its time, right? And the US and its allies in Europe in particular were still riding high, right? I think that period is past. It cannot be recreated. The kind of generous American policies that we associated with American foreign policy for 40 years after the end of the Cold War, those were artifacts of a particular period of world history that is not going to be recreated. I'll just give you one example: tariffs. I'm sure the previous speaker had talked about this and so on. Free trade, or trade, whether it should be free or fair, has always been a very controversial issue in the American body politic from the very beginning of the Republic. But for those 40 years after the end of the World War II, America adopted relatively generous policies, trade policies, not out of altruism, by the way, not even probably out of for economic advantage. It adopted them as a weapon in its global competition with the Soviet Union in order to bind countries to itself, right? Right now, the US faces no existential threat anywhere in the world. China is a formidable competitor in some fields, not in every field, because China has serious weaknesses too, but it's not an existential threat. Russia is certainly an existential threat to Ukraine and some of the smaller European countries, but not to the United States. North Korea, well, it may be a threat, an existential threat to its immediate neighborhood, but to the United States, very doubtful. And perhaps the whole point of the war against Iran is to prevent it from becoming an existential threat. We can talk about that later, right? So I think bear in mind this framework, right? When you look at things, you get a different perspective in particular events, right? And finally, that competition between states is an inherent characteristic of international relations, and sometimes competition turns into conflict, right? And so if you have a concept of international order, it is a fundamental mistake, a theological mistake, to think of it as something that necessarily must command universal consensus. Much more often than not in history, the only order we knew is defined by competition and efforts to make it less dangerous, right? Now, this is often these very simple points. In fact, you want to call them simplistic. I will not argue with you too much, but I always believe that a good starting point for analysis of anything is Occam's razor. You have heard of this principle of Occam's razor. That means use the simplest explanation possible, at least to start with, and then you can add complexity. Don't start by looking for very complicated explanations and then try to pare them down. Okay, let me talk about, with this framework, let me talk a bit very briefly about US-China relations and the war against Iran. Right? Now, US-China relations is a process. I looked at the coverage of most of the world media, particularly in Europe and in the United States, of the last Trump summit in April, was it May? In May this year, right? And it was quite clear that they looked at it in a binary way. They looked at it as a win-lose situation. And there was a clear inclination to put forward a narrative that Trump lost. And I think that is as much a reflection of distaste for him. And there's a lot to dislike about Mr. Trump, but that doesn't mean that you should not try to be a little balanced in assessing it. I can't remember the exact words, but both the New York Times and Washington Post, for example, basically said Trump was bamboozled. Right? Now, I don't think that was the purpose of the summit. There were some deals reached and so on, but very often, within a week of those deals, both the US and China took actions that showed that the competition is not at their end. And if it's not at their end, then I don't think it makes much sense to try to assess at any particular point of time who won, who lost, because as I said, a week or a month ahead, you are going to have a different judgment, right? So I think it's better to understand it as what I said, that they have both decided that this is a long-term strategic competition, it's not going to end, and therefore let's try to stabilize it for as long as possible. I don't think any deal they have reached is going to last very long, but enjoy it while it occurs. Enjoy it while you can, because it's going to fall apart, and competition is going to go up in a high intensity phase again, and then they will stabilize it again, and this is how it's going to work for the foreseeable future. Now, let me talk about Iran. There again, there's this narrative which I cannot understand, that this was all a waste of time, and the US lost to Iran. Now, this war was never going to end in any neat and conclusive way. I don't think it's over, by the way. Right? It is the end, maybe at best, of one phase of this war, just as the kinetic war, was the beginning of a different phase. The US, or the West generally, and Iran, and certainly Israel and Iran, have been in a shadow war since the early 2000s, for 20 years, before this phase started. Right? It moved from a shadow phase to a overt kinetic phase. You'll probably go back to a shadow phase with kinetic episodes, and so on. But there will be, sooner or later, another war. But it is patently absurd, to my mind, to say that it was all a waste of time and nothing has changed. A lot has changed. First of all, the Iranian economy wasn't in great shape. It was teetering on the brink of collapse before the war, and the war certainly hasn't improved it. Right? So that kind of fragility is something that nobody should ignore, and the Iranian regime is certainly not ignoring it. They know that their rule is brittle, because the minute the ceasefire was announced, they started executions in a big way again to try to stabilize the internal situation. Because I don't think they are going to be able to do very much in the immediate future or for the foreseeable future to improve the Iranian economy. Right? And that is the base. Right? So that's one thing that has changed. Second thing that has changed, I think, is the mistrust of the Gulf states for Iran has been reinforced. Of course, they will try to stabilize their relations with Iran and so on. It's not that they're going to shun Iran. But I never thought I would live long enough to see Saudi Arabia and UAE at least joining in kinetic attacks against Iran. Right? But they did. And there's and Iran attacking them too. So that has reinforced the distrust that's always been there. It's probably made it deeper. And it's also reinforced a certain simple lesson. Where is the effective balance to Iran? There's only two countries, the US and Israel. Uh, uh, and that means, and I think the Gulf states will share my view that this is just one end of one phase. It's not the end of the war. There will be another big war over Iran sooner or later, maybe in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but it will happen, right? Thirdly, I think that another thing that has changed is both sides made serious mistakes. On the American-Israeli side, the serious mistake is shifting goals. At various times, they have said regime change, Iran's nuclear weapons, keeping the Straits of Hormuz, just to maintain three. There are sub things of three. And this shifting goalposts was a big strategic mistake because it gives you no way of assessing for yourself how successful you have been. You know, and actually they have been fairly successful. This is not the same Iran as it was before, right? And it's not necessarily a stronger Iran. In fact, it is a weaker Iran. It survived because I think regime change was never a very sensible goal in the first place. And even if you are out for regime change, please don't say that my goal is regime change, because it just stiffens the resistance of the other side. Right? If you really want to change a regime, just go ahead and try, and don't announce it as a goal. But the Iranian side, I think, the big strategic mistake is to close the Strait of Hormuz. Right? That has basically united almost the whole world against you. Not that most countries can do anything useful about it, but it's also a card you can only play once in an effective way. Right? Because, I mean, I at least have been hearing for the last 30 years from various Gulf states that they have to build pipelines, new ports, and so on to bypass the Straits of Hormuz, but they have not done anything about it. Now they have to do something about it, because I think they know this animosity between them and Iran is not going away, and there will be another war. Another thing that has changed is Iran's nuclear program. Now, as I said, this war is never going to end in a neat and definitive way. And once a country has it in their head that I need nuclear weapons, you can only delay the realization of that ambition. You cannot erase that ambition. Why? Because the knowledge of how to enrich uranium and build a weapon cannot be erased. So if they have, any country if it has it in their head, it's not going to, you cannot lobotomize that bit of their brain and take it away. And there have been only two countries that had nuclear weapons and gave them up, which is South Africa and Ukraine. And Ukraine has been publicly remorseful about doing it. And I'll be very surprised. South Africa hasn't said anything, but I would be very surprised if South Africa hasn't kind of been with a little bit of remorse about whether or not this was the right thing to do to give them up. There's a third one, which is Kazakhstan. I forgot. But Kazakhstan didn't have much choice in the matter. But I don't know whether they are remorseful or not. I would be very surprised if they are not a tad remorseful, because I do know they are rather worried about Russia. Right? So anyway, there will be another war. Diplomacy has clearly failed. Is one thing that we do know now is that Iran has been bamboozling the IAEA for decades, right? Because it's got quite a lot of highly enriched uranium. How did they get it? Not something you can do overnight, right? And secondly, so the only way to delay further is war. Now, this, I don't know, they have not yet even started talking about the nuclear issue, but they start talking about it from a different baseline as the JCPOA. I don't think the JCPOA is a good baseline in which to judge this thing, because the weakness of the JCPOA, which delayed enrichment for 15 years, right? But it left all the enrichment infrastructure intact. And in the Middle East, for all sides, one thing you can count on is everybody is going to cheat. Whatever agreement they have reached on whatever, they are going to cheat. Whether ceasefires, for example, in the Middle East are merely suggestions. as you can see, actually, in the last few months. Right? So I think it is not the same Iran, it's not the same Middle East. I think Iran is still there, it's going to be a factor. I don't think regime change was a good idea, and there is always an assumption, particularly in the West, that regime change results in better regimes. There is no either empirical or logical reason to make that assumption. Why must regime change result in better regimes? It could well result in worse. And in a way, there has been regime change in Iran in the sense that the theocratic part of the regime has been severely weakened. We don't even know whether the supreme leader is alive. If he's alive, what condition he's in. Nobody has seen him for months. And so it's a new regime in which the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is going to play a bigger role. It's a much more militarized regime. Right? So is that a better regime? We can argue about that, right? I don't think it's a better regime. Right? But anyway, it's what you have. Okay. It's not the same Middle East. It's going to be a Middle East where the US and Israel have emerged as, on the military front, as the only possible balance to Iran. Iran's two main allies, Russia and China, have proven ineffectual in helping it either to deter an attack on them or once an attack starts to help them in any meaningful way. And I don't think that. It's quite clear, for example, that China at least prioritized stabilizing its relationship with the US over doing anything useful to help what it calls a comprehensive strategic partner, which is Iran. Now, this has implications beyond the Middle East. And I'll just make one last point. Something very important happened in the middle of this war between the US and Iran in Southeast Asia. Do you all know what that is? What that thing was? What? Sorry? OPEC is a useless organization. No. No, that's not that. What is very important that happened in April, in the middle of the war, is that Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country, which has been one of the main, who has suffered the fuel and fertilizer shortage the most, concluded a defense cooperation agreement with the US while he was fighting against another Middle East, another Muslim country. Okay, Shia, not Sunni, but still, right? Now that shows a certain kind of strategic pragmatism that Mr. Khani doesn't have. Because I think there is no country in this part of the world who believes that, middle powers should work more together. That's for sure. But you are not a replacement for the foundation of stability, that a balance of power that you need in order for you to work effectively together. If the foundation is unstable, middle powers cannot work together in any effective way. Okay, I'll stop here and take your questions. You don't have to confine yourself to these two issues. Just let me know who you are and where you come from and who you first and then you.
Thank you for those insights. My name is Ludwig. I'm from the Philippines.
And you work for? Your news organization?
The Manila Times.
Manila Times, okay.
Yeah. This may come in somehow a political question, but I assure you...
All questions are political.
Okay. But I assure you I will not write about it. No. My question will focus on the China's claim on the South China Sea.
Yeah.
We know that the Philippines and China have a spot on this issue. What are your thoughts on this particular issue? And if you were given the opportunity to advise the Philippine president, what advice would you give?
Well, first of all, this is not a new issue, as you know. It's not an issue that's ever going to be resolved. And it's not an issue that can be the theology of this issue is international law and so on. The reality of this issue is you need to have a balance of power. Now, I don't think Philippines is ever going to be forced to give up its claim over, there's been just another skirmish over Scarborough Shoal, right? But you need not do that because the Seventh Fleet is present. Now, it's a stalemate, actually. Nobody is going to make the Chinese dig up the sand from those artificial islands and throw it back in the sea. But neither can the Chinese force any claimant state to give up its claims or stop the US and its friends and allies operating in, through, under, over the South China Sea. Now, that is not an ideal situation, but we live in a less than ideal world. Now, the big mistake that the Philippines did, I was still in the foreign ministry when you brought China to the arbitral tribunal. And I asked my counterpart, I was what I guess you would call, I was a permanent secretary. I don't know what you call it. I think permanent secretary to or vice minister in Philippines. Secretary, right? So I asked my counterpart, okay, very good, you're doing this, you're doing us all a favor. There are some legal issues that need to be clarified, but what's the next step? Then he looked at me, next step, there must be a next step. I don't think it was thought through by the Philippines. I don't think it was the wrong thing to do, but I think it was wrong not to think about the next step and the step after that. And it was certainly wrong to do it when you had no Navy or Air Force worth talking about. Right? And you still don't have very much of it. It's better now, but it's still not good enough. The Philippines Navy and Air Force is, I set aside Timor-Leste and Laos and things like that, and Cambodia is probably the weakest in Southeast Asia of the thing, right? Now you look at how China has treated the Philippines and how China has treated Vietnam. Vietnam has been doing nasty things too in the Paracels. You know, it's been reclaiming land on atolls that have been disputed. It's been doing all kinds of things, but China has not treated Vietnam the same way as it treated the Philippines. Why? Because Vietnam has a navy and an air force which is not as big as China, but it's something that China cannot disregard. Whereas China can disregard the Philippine Air Force and Navy, and has done so. Now, you are now engaged belatedly in building up. So that's my advice. You better build up your military capability. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to deal with this in any way that is so asymmetrical that you're going to get pushed around. It's not that there is a military solution to this problem. There is no solution to these competing claims. But you can keep it alive. There are two conditions. One, you need the US around and its friends, allies like Japan and so on. And two, if you are a claimant state, you better have the means to make other claimant states at least think twice. Okay. Now you had a question?
Yeah.
It's off.
Yeah, on.
It's off.
Yeah, before this war,
Who are you?
Sorry. My name is Jitendra. I work with the New Indian Express newspaper, New Delhi.
Which express? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
New Indian Express newspaper.
Okay. Yeah.
So before this war, the Strait Hormuz was opened.
Yeah.
And after this war, the Strait of Hormuz is complete and control of the Iran.
Yeah.
And this is a major outcome of this war.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, one of the major outcome. It is going to be leverage Iran for many, many years. We don't know how much. So my question is that closure of Hormuz is an Asian problem, not the world problem, because the Asian economic giants are getting their major source of energy from this route. So my question is that how this world is going to deal with this issue, or how this Asian economy is going to deal with this issue, because it is going to stay here. Iran is going to stay here in the Strait of Hormuz. So enlighten us that how gonna Asian countries.
I don't know whether I can enlighten you, but I can give you an opinion. Right? First of all, I said this is a card that can be played effectively only once. The Gulf states are going to build infrastructure to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. UAE, they've had these plans for at least 30 years that I know. But UAE is accelerated its plans for a pipeline. There will be other plans. There will be new ports built. And it's always going, and the beneficiary of this, I think, is going to be Oman. Because if you look at the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, outside the Strait of Hormuz, half is Iran, half is Yemen. You got to be out of your mind to go and build infrastructure through Yemen. So they're going to do it through Oman. It will take time. It's not going to be done overnight, right? Secondly, if you look, India is a bit different, but Japan, South Korea, and China for that matter, they are diversifying their sources of oil. There is no dearth of oil in the world, by the way. Huh? It just happens to be somewhere else, and we all got used to the easy option, which is from Hormuz. But there's no dearth of oil anywhere else, right? So I think that there's going to be diversification, right, of supply from the Middle East, right? That diversification has already begun in the case of Japan and South Korea. They are buying more US oil, for example, and they will continue to, I think. China is diversifying in all directions, right? So there's another change. It's not going to be the same Iran. It's not going to be the same thing, the same importance, because we have all seen the vulnerability. And having seen the vulnerability, we're rather stupid to carry on exposing yourself to the same vulnerability without trying to mitigate it. And I think countries will try to mitigate it. And the oil producers in the Gulf, apart from Iran, are going to build new infrastructure to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. It's already begun, and I think it will accelerate probably, and the beneficiary will be Oman. Yes, ma'am. All right. 2 ma'ams, okay. 3, all right. All right, 1, 2, 3, okay? 4, slow, I cannot count more than 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, all right? All right.
Hello, sir. My name is Fatima Nazish, and I work for Deutsche Welle.
What? For me?
Deutsche Welle, DW.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my question is in context of the US-Iran war impact on Pakistan. Like we have seen that Pakistan is just become the peace talk leader in the world. But at the other hand, the picture is totally changed. After Iran-US war, like we face so many ban and kind of the hike of prices, inflation, the fuel prices gone almost double. And Qatar suspend the visa on arrival of for the Pakistani passport. At the other hand, we have seen the violent attacks on the US consulate in the Karachi, and then in the result, the Pakistan-US consulate shut down. So but we see that the US praise Pakistan a lot. The other country says, oh, Pakistan has become like this and that. But the public of Pakistan is facing a massive trouble condition. After COVID, we have seen another partial lockdown in Pakistan because of US-Iran war. So what's your thoughts on this? Where Pakistan stand in the next 5 years in the future?
Okay, I'll be very blunt, right? Pakistan was very agile and very successful in taking advantage of a diplomatic opportunity. And that has gone some way to rehabilitate Pakistan diplomatically in the eyes of the US anyway. But wait. Yeah, but you know, that doesn't feed the Pakistani people. Pakistan is a state that is teetering on the brink of failure. All right? Okay, and has been for some time. It hasn't quite fallen over, for which we all should be grateful. But the diplomatic success doesn't change that fundamental reality. And I don't think the US is going to lift whatever restrictions in totality it has on Pakistan, because the fact is Pakistan is a hotbed of all kinds of strange groups that are not necessarily working for US interests. Pakistani military was very agile and very successful. That, you know, we have to give them credit. But that diplomatic success don't feed people. That's the hard reality. Pakistan's problems are not diplomatic. Pakistan's problems are much more fundamental within Pakistan, right? Mismanagement of the economy, letting various jihadist movements get out of hand, right? And if you don't fix those problems, you're always going to be teetering on the brink of state failure. And everybody is worried about it because you happen to have nuclear weapons. If you had no nuclear weapons, nobody would care. Okay. Yeah, I know. I'm going this way. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Cecilia. I'm from NHK Jakarta Bureau. My question is: Indonesia is one of its non-bloc country. In this situation, in this geopolitical situation, how to find the middle ground on this non-bloc non-alignment, and particularly under the new president, under President Prabowo Subianto, because we know that President just joined Board of Peace and then made an agreement with Secretary of War in the U.S. and even didn't come to ASEAN-Russia summit this month. So yeah, how to find a middle ground on this, and how do you see the ASEAN centrality is still relevant in this situation? And yeah, because you mentioned that let's say middle countries, they should have a strong foundation to meet and influence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Those are good questions. Look, I think it is first of all to think of one middle ground. There are many middle grounds. And there are many. When we say, and Indonesia says, Singapore says, every damn ASEAN country says, we do not wish to choose, right? What do we mean? We don't mean that you are going to be neutral, because you cannot be neutral vis-a-vis your own interests, of course, right? Right? We do not mean we are going to be equidistant, because what does that mean anyway? I don't know. What we mean is, and Indonesia does it pretty well, we are going to follow our own interests in which direction they take us. Some of our interests will take us in a direction that seems to be aligned with the West. Certainly in Singapore's case, we chose, in defense and security matters, we have chosen in that direction long ago. Indonesia, for the last 10, 15 years, is drifting in that direction because there's a simple reason. Can you balance China by yourself? The answer is no, right? So there's no choice. That's why you have this defense cooperation agreement, right? And I think that's strategic pragmatism. That doesn't mean that you have to align your interests in the same direction, let's say where economics is concerned. It doesn't mean that you should shun Iran or shun China or shun Russia. So I think Indonesia knows how to play this game quite well. And this president, this president has got other liabilities that we know, right?
Still free, but more active.
Very active, but how free we can discuss. Tentu aktif lah, bebas saya tak tahu. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, ASEAN centrality, look, this is theology, right? We are not going to be central just by saying over and over again, I am central, I am central, I am central. Nor are we going to be central because our partners are polite enough to say you are central. They don't really think so. And the fact is, the strategic center of gravity in East Asia is always been the Northeast, not in the Southeast, right? So it's okay, it doesn't do any harm as long as we don't believe it. If we don't confuse the theology with the reality, then we'll be all right. And I don't think Indonesia does it, makes that confusion. Not all Indonesians, some do, I know. I don't think Singapore does. I don't think several ASEAN countries do. So I think we will be all right. The vulnerability of Indonesia, again, not as drastic as Pakistan, is internal. The economy, you know better than me. People are suffering, right? I don't think you will be downgraded to frontier status from emerging market, but I hope not anyway, because that would be quite disastrous. I don't think so, but I can't rule it out. And the very fact that people are talking about it shows that there have been too many policy changes in Indonesia in too short a time without much explanation of why you do this or why you do that. Now, President Prabowo is, I think, part of the traditional Indonesian foreign security defense policy elite. So this he knows how to do pretty well. The other one, okay, we'll see. All right. Wait. And then her.
Thank you.
And then you.
Thank you very much for sharing time with us today.
Yeah.
My name is Asil. I'm from Kyrgyzstan. It's in Central Asia. I represent Central Asia today. Yeah. Okay. And I'm head of and founder of Chikit Media. It's a local small media outlet in Kyrgyzstan. We share information in Kyrgyz language. I would like to
you said
ask
Kyrgyzstan, right?
Kyrgyzstan.
Okay, I know.
Yeah,
Bishkek.
Kazakhstan. Yeah, Bishkek. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, you're right. So this is a local small media outlet, the youngest, one of the youngest, and I would like you to ask you about Russian-Ukrainian war, because it has very big negative impact to Central Asia. And according to your forecast, when might Russia's position weaken under the impact of international sanctions, and when, in your opinion, could be Russia-Ukrainian war come to the end?
The simple answer to that is it won't. The best you can hope for is what you see now, which is a de facto stalemate. Right? There may be a ceasefire, but there will not be a definitive settlement. Because any definite settlement means that Ukraine will have to give up territory, and it may have to give up territory de facto, but it cannot give up territory de jure. Because then whoever is Ukrainian president will be hung from the nearest lamppost by his own people. So the best you can hope for Ukraine is something like a Korean Peninsula situation, an armistice that can last quite some time, and a de facto divided country. That's the harsh reality. I know all the Central Asian countries are extremely worried, and if I were you, I would be too. Kazakhstan in particular is rather worried, right? But I don't see that the Ukrainians are never going to push the Russians out of Donbass or Crimea. Crimea is lost. They're not going to push them out of Donbass. But neither can Russia overrun Ukraine. So they are going to be there in this position, bleeding, both of them, for a very long time. Now, I never had looked at this war as one against good and evil. Ukrainians are not angels just because they are the victims. Being a victim does not automatically make you an angel, right? And I think the Ukrainians did make several mistakes too. I'll tell you a thing. I probably was the last Singapore diplomat. I was still in the service then, to go to Crimea when we were still part of Ukraine. This was in December 2013, right? And I went to the Maidan and had a look at the demonstrations before they started shooting. I'm not so mad. Once they shooting, I wouldn't go there, right? But they were not yet shooting. It's pretty celebratory, actually, the atmosphere. But I looked at it. I listened to somebody from the European Union promising milk and honey if Ukraine went that way. And I said to myself, and I told the Ukrainian Foreign Service officer that was following me, well, I'll tell you why, that this reminds me of Hungary in 1956. Because I did not think any Russian government would tolerate Ukraine being lost to the West. Right now, how does this thing? It's not going to end. Russia cannot give up. Mr. Putin cannot give up. He will be thrown out the window of the Kremlin if he gives up. And Zelensky or whoever takes over cannot give up because his own people will hang him from a lamppost if he tries to give up. Right? So that's the harsh reality. It will be a stalemate. The best you can hope for is a stop or a long pause to the fighting, an armistice, not a peace deal. An armistice and a divided country, de facto divided. Now, the rest of Central Asia will have to live with this, right? I think Kyrgyzstan is right to be worried, but I think Kazakhstan is even more worried because they have a very large Russian population. I don't think our population of Russians are not so big. 7 million out of, what's your total population?
You mean population of Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah.
7 million.
Total population,
Total
7
population.
Yeah, but Russian population is not so many, right? No. Kazakhstan has got huge Russian population and contiguous to Russia too. So they are much more worried, right? And they are right to be worried. But, you will have to play the balancing game, that's all. You have Russia, you have China, but you need third parties. You need to improve your relations with the West, not the EU, because the EU can hardly take care of itself. Let alone take care of anybody else, right? So it will have to be, to some degree, the US, maybe Japan, maybe South Korea, which has got interest there. But you are in a difficult position. I don't envy you, but, there is no solution to this. You can only manage it. Okay. Now.
Thank you.
Here. Did you have a question or you asked already? I thought you had a question. Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful conversation. My name is Omar. I'm also from Pakistan.
Uh-huh.
I work for Dawn newspaper.
The Dawn, all right. Okay.
Yeah. As you said, that Pakistan problems are internal problems. They are fundamental. But don't you think Pakistan, it's all happening, Pakistan experiencing because of its location? As Pakistan has so many borders, it's Afghanistan, Iran, India, China, and because
Don't
of
forget
its
India. You have a
location,
border with India too.
because of its location, Pakistan is experiencing such challenges. And the other thing, what do you suggest? What are the solutions Pakistan can make a progress and get from the such problems?
Okay, first of all, I don't think you can blame your location on everything. That's an excuse. All right. The fact is, Pakistan, from the very beginning of Pakistan, has been mismanaged terribly. Right? And I don't see any solution. The military is both part of the problem and what holds the country together. Your civilian politicians are a waste of time. All of them, regardless of party. Right? I tell you a story. Right? 1991, I was still in the service. Some Pakistanis hijacked a Singapore airliner. Do you remember? Do you know that? They were not very good hijackers because they allowed us to park the airliner in the precise spot that every airport prepares for hijack, so we can fix up things and have a look what's inside. Now, we never quite knew what was their demand, except that they wanted to talk to Benazir Bhutto, who was then out of power. She was in her estate in the scene. And it was my duty as in the team to try and get in touch with her, and with the help of the Pakistani High Commissioner, I got in touch with her. She was not in Islamabad, she was in Sindh, somewhere, family estate, right? And it was in the middle of the night, it was around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So finally, with the help of the Pakistani High Commissioner, this don't write, I got in touch with her, or at least her house. And first of all, once I got through to her house, I had to find somebody who spoke something other than Urdu, because none of us can speak Urdu in that team, right? So finally got somebody who could speak English. I don't know who he was. He was some servant or some member of the household, right? So I explained to him carefully what's the situation. This is 4 or 5 hijackers. We're not sure what they want, but they want to speak to Madam Benazir Bhutto, and they have told us if they can speak to her, they will surrender. If they cannot speak to her, they will start killing the passengers. So I explained this to the person 3 times. And he said, "Ma'am is sleeping, cannot be disturbed," and put down the phone. Then we stormed the plane, killed all the hijackers. So we still do not know, and we'll never know what they really wanted, because they're all dead. But none of our passengers were injured. Now, I tell you this story to show that this is a very feudalistic society you have in Pakistan. You know better than me.
Not the entire society is feudalistic.
Most of the society is feudalistic. Your elite is okay. Your civilian elite is okay. They are actually quite modern and so on, but they are ineffectual. They have no power. They have no guts. And I don't blame them, because somebody will cut off their head.
But no one can now.
Unfortunately, fortunately,
but anything, according to my knowledge, everything is happening because of the Afghanistan.
You can't blame everything on other people.
Afghanistan and other countries are also behind, so happening.
No, I agree. Your geographical location doesn't help, but it is not the root cause. And if you all countries that continue to blame some other country for their problems will never get out of the problem. It doesn't matter where you're located.
Hello,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Amanda from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
I'm Singaporean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question. Israel is not very happy with the US because they actually have a MOU with Iran now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi. Should I repeat my question?
Yeah, please.
Oh, yes. Hi.
I heard it, but they didn't.
Okay. So Israel don't seem very happy with the US because they
That's an understatement.
Yeah, they settle on a MOU with Iran.
Yeah.
And how do you actually think that this will there be any impact on the relations between US and Israel, and how will US actually balance its commitment of security with Israel?
First of all, I've told my Israeli friends, don't get so upset because this MOU is not going to last. Right? Anyway, it's falling apart even as we speak. Because have you read the MOU? I mean, Wall Street Journal published an annotated version. It's quite interesting. But when you look at the language, it's so vague. Both sides can claim anything, and therefore they will. So I said, in the Middle East, everybody's going to cheat, and and MOUs, even treaties, are just suggestions, right? So I don't think the U.S. and Israel, whether they may not love each other, they don't always love each other. They have quarreled before, but they are stuck with each other. The Israelis need the U.S. at their back in order to. They are militarily powerful and they have their own capabilities, but they need the U.S. at their back. And the U.S. needs Israel because it's the only kind of reliable partner or ally they have in the Middle East. Look, the Middle East consists of mainly failed or failing states, failed or failing states, Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Iraq. Fragile state, shall we say. Egypt, Jordan, the Maghreb countries, these are fragile states. The promising states, but it's still early, is the Gulf states, minus Yemen. We must hope that they succeed. The only successful states, fragile states and failing states, you can throw in Iran into that thing because it's a rather fragile condition. So the only successful states that can be considered successful in the whole of Middle East are Israel and Turkey. So the US is not going to abandon them, although both are difficult allies for the US, and both also find the US difficult, but they're all stuck together. So I don't think there's a lot of noise. The Israelis and the US don't have to love each other, they just have to have some common interest. Do you know that Israel in the 1967 war started the war by attacking a US naval vessel? Deliberately, and killing a few US soldiers. Of course, they say it was accident, sorry, didn't know and all that. But, we now know it was a deliberate act because they wanted to get it out of the way before so that they could do what they needed to do. So there's no love lost in that relationship. Never has been. But they are stuck with each other anyway.
Elliot, I'm from the Capital Forum. So I used to work for FT and the Wall Street Journal in Beijing for 10 years and now in Hong Kong, covering global merger acquisitions. And one topic you mentioned about is like this kind of global trade war and supply chain is making global mergers very, very uncertain. So for example, like Mr. Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong is trying to sell the Panama port. But then China is not happy about that. Trump is not happy about that. So this deal is not going to get through because of those regulatory uncertainties. And also like in 2018, when Qualcomm is trying to buy NXPI, it's a $43 billion deal. Then China basically killed that deal. And now there's another deal similar like this. So wondering what's your advice, like how to navigate this kind of risks in this uncertain world? Thank you.
I don't think you can navigate these risks. You just have to be aware of them and be agile. I think the Panama deal will not go through in its original form, but it will go through in some form with some Chinese participation, but not Chinese ownership. Right? I think there's one in Singapore, Manus, right? Right? That I think is quite harmful to China because it was a done deal, and you try to reverse it, and then you detain the two founders, right? Now, what kind of signal does that send to not just foreign companies, to Chinese companies, right? And then you are tightening capital controls actually. In China, it's harder and harder to get things out, even to Hong Kong, right? Even to Hong Kong, right? Which they forget is part of China. So I think it shows that some of the dilemmas the Chinese economy face. I think the fundamental dilemma is that back in 2012, back in 2012, at the 18th Party Congress, the party, the Chinese Communist Party itself, acknowledged in public that the growth model of the 1990s and the first part of the 2000s, the first decade, was not sustainable, right? And 2013, they roll out a new growth model that promised more economic efficiency. Very little, as you know, of that growth model is being implemented. And I think there's a very fundamental reason for that. China is a communist country. People forget it. Not in its ideology anymore. Its ideology is a kind of ethno-nationalism, but certainly in its political structure. It's a Leninist state, right? And the fundamental value of a Leninist state is control. But economic efficiency, almost by definition, means less control. Now, it's not an absolute choice. It's not total control or total letting go completely. It's a new balance. That new balance, I think, since 2013, 2012, the party has been very reluctant to find. In fact, generally speaking, the movement has been towards more control. We just had something. Now, that is a fundamental contradiction, right? I think. And you can't... Okay, China, there are some advantages to being a communist country because it means, first of all, there's no real private sector. You are private until I want you not to be private. I tell you, right? Then you have no choice. But there's some advantage. It means that for the whole country, you have one balance sheet. And I can keep shuffling money around almost indefinitely, but not forever. So I happen to think that China is betting too much on high tech. It's done very well in high tech, but I think it's betting too much. In fact, you look at the Chinese economy, it is getting quite bifurcated. The high tech is doing okay, in fact, quite well. The more traditional economy is not so okay, it's stuck. And the basic problem, and whether the high tech part can continue to do well under conditions of tight control is an open question to me. Because especially these new technologies, you need a certain degree of chaos, for it to flourish, Right? That's why Silicon Valley is still the leader by far, China is very good at applying the research that has been done in Silicon Valley and other places. It's better than the US at that, I think. But anyway, I think the jury is still out, and I think you cannot continue in this state forever because this is where black swans are breeding. Right? But the fundamental problem is this. The fundamental problem is one of confidence. Why are people trying to bring money out of China? For many reasons, but one of them is lack of confidence. And things like the Manus deal, things like, last year, right, when the Chinese economy was doing badly, they called Alibaba, Jack Ma, everybody and said, I love you anyway, please, right? And then 2 weeks later, or less than 2 weeks later, there's a Politburo meeting, which they publicized. They didn't have to publicize it, where what was publicized is Xi Jinping saying that party security is the main priority. Right? So you go this way, then you go that way, then you swing back that way. I don't think you can go on oscillating like this forever without breeding black swans.
So what's your outlook for the next 10 years?
China will be there. China is not going to collapse, but I think it's going to perform. It probably will do fairly well in the tech sector, although there will be a lot of wastage and there's a lot of inefficiency, but you'll still do okay. This one, I think, is going to be suboptimal performance. The other part, suboptimal performance. I don't think efforts to promote domestic consumption as a driver of growth are going to work. They have been trying for about 15 years already. It didn't work then. I don't see why it should work now. I am always puzzled because I know of no big Chinese company that's actually making money. A few, Alibaba, Tencent, and all that, they're making money. All the EV countries, the battery companies, they are not making money. And it's not just these things, I know somebody, Lakin, right? They are opening so many outlets in Indonesia. I mean, I think a few thousand, outlets across Indonesia. And I asked an Indonesian friend who is in the coffee business, He's puzzled how they can be making money. By his calculations, every cup of coffee they sell, they lose money. But that's just one example, you know. Or there's this kind of involution. It cannot go on forever. Right? Even when you export, right? I told a Chinese friend, don't congratulate so much because you're exporting a lot to the third world. These countries got no money. You got to lend them money to buy your exports, and you're not going to get paid back. I can guarantee you that. Because all the Western countries went through this and they got burned. China is just new to this game, but you are getting burned. So I don't think this can go on forever. Now, that does not mean China is going to collapse. China is quite a resilient society. It's quite adaptive, right? The Chinese Communist Party, unlike the Soviet Communist Party, is an adaptive creature. But it's adapting rather than confronting the core issue, which is to need a different balance between political control and economic efficiency. All the countries in East Asia, from Japan in the 19th century, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, when we started growing, none of us was a democratic country. But as our economies developed, we had to open the political parameters, not totally wide, because in the West, argumentatively are so wide that that it's become dysfunctional too. But I think you need to find some new balance. Hopefully, they will find it in the next decade. But I am not optimistic because the fundamental problem is Mr. Xi himself. Don't write that. They will never come out again. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, last one.
Hi. I'm Rupali Mukherjee. I work with the Times of India in Delhi. I had two questions, but if we can just squeeze in at least one.
Okay, one.
So from the Southeast Asian perspective, do you think that that India can play as a balance of power against China, or as an economic opportunity in its own right?
Yeah, you are playing such a role, not in a very decisive way because you have your own problems and your focus ought to be the Indian Ocean. But you are playing, you have the, what is it called? I think it's exercise Malabar. Mm-hmm. Every other year is in the Pacific and then it's in the Andaman Sea. You are selling certain kinds of weapon systems to Philippines, among other countries. And you are a big market. So I think you're playing that role, but I don't think you are going, and you will play more of such a role, right? But I don't think you are going to be a substitute for the US, for example.
Yeah, so my question is related to the other question was also actually just you kind of touched upon it briefly, is that in this whole US-China war, India was supposed to be kind of coming up as a diversified supply chain for a lot of the global MNCs. Do you think that we have come, because this has been going on for a while, do you think that we can still be there at all?
You are there to some degree, but you need to, it's not going to happen automatically. There are certain things India has to do in terms of its educational system, its labor supply of the right type, infrastructure, power supply, things like that. It's not automatically everything is going to go to India. Anyway, India has many places, so some parts of India are doing all right, but I think you are not yet performing up to potential because of bottlenecks within India.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
How do you see Israel, as you were talking of Middle East? Is a part of the problem or part of the solution? Because
it is a country in the Middle East. All the Middle East countries have accepted it as a country in the Middle East.
But as waging war with Lebanon.
Yeah, because they are not very. None of the Gulf states are extremely upset with Israel for waging war against Hezbollah. No, by the way.
Atrocities in Gaza. Atrocities in Gaza.
Yeah, they talk about it, but they don't do anything about it. Because there's a lot of hypocrisy. They don't give a shit about the Palestinians. Right? The governments, I'm not talking about the people, right? They don't care. To them, this is a domestic problem to be managed because their people are upset. But they are quite happy with Israel because after Saddam Hussein's Iraq was destroyed, the only possible regional balance to Iran is Israel. And the Palestinians are collateral damage. They will wring their hands and cry, and put resolutions in the UN and all that. That is theology. They don't give a shit about the Palestinians. They don't like the Palestinians.
Again, I have to end it before we've exhausted questions, but I can't thank the Secretary for taking us on another tour around the world to end this conference. So please join me in thanking Secretary.